Language of Tapestry is an event in 3 parts. A creative exploration of how tapestry technique, structure and theme can be translated through the disciplines of movement and music. A close weaving of these disciplines forms a performance event that is captured forever within the stitches of its own needlepoint tapestry. And this short film, Behind the Stitches, presenting a look at the making of the work, forming the final section of the event. The 3 elements are presented as seen on the tapestry itself. Performance, tapestry, behind the stitches.
I think about performance like pieces of material, different elements such as a gesture, a section of music, a particular colour or an intended image. These are all things in themselves, but I find the process of bringing these materials together interesting. I refer to my work like collage. I would layer elements together and see how they interact with one another on the stage. But for this project, I'd use the term weave, appropriate for a project inspired by tapestry. Elements are woven together within a framework supported by tapestry theme and structure.
Alex and I have collaborated on small-scale pieces in the past, and we wanted to create a larger in-person work. In September, Alex came to me with the idea of making a larger project based on the art of tapestry making. We wanted to involve other musicians and also movers to create a multidisciplinary project.
I'm interested in the postmodern way of thinking about performance, a rejection of linear narrative in favour of a theme or a topic that can provide material, or a different way of thinking about performance. It was exciting for me to explore how the different elements from the world or language of tapestry could present new opportunities and ways of thinking within my practice, and to share this exploration with a group of individuals from different disciplines.
The performance was made and first performed at the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire during the year of 2021-22, and was initially the idea of theatre designer and director Alexander Kaniewski. The work was made in collaboration with composer and cellist Kinna Whitehead, and supported by an ensemble of artists from different disciplines. Vocalist Lottie, Tom Dalrymple and Lida Chatzidimitriou, movement, and James Mcilwrath, viola.
I think the combination of hard work, endurance and creativity really makes the art of tapestry resonate with music and musicians. I think the art forms are actually quite similar. So finding a balance between structure and, I guess, freedom in the music was key.
Stitch by stitch, the tapestry slowly grows within the framework of the fabric's warp and weft. Such ideas are reflected in the disciplines. Music played live transcends the notes on the page, just as the linking of gestures form a dance.
Why tapestry? That's a good question. So I was watching a documentary called The Secrets of the Museum, and they were talking about the Devonshire hunting tapestries. They were taking them down for refurbishment and sending them back to Chatsworth House. And what struck me was that these tapestries depicted events, moments in time presented in cloth. And I thought that as a theatre maker, I create events. So what would it be like to present one of my own events in tapestry form? So I went to Chatsworth and I saw these tapestries and they were very impressive. If you don't know them, they're a set of 15th century tapestries to depict hunting scenes with lots of people in funny hats and animals. And what was interesting is that they were composed in a way that wasn't following the laws of perspective. Instead, it wanted to give a overall experience of the event. The components were arranged in a pleasant composition rather than something that was true to life. And this was very interesting and something that I took into consideration when designing and composing the tapestry for this performance.
A structure of simple gestures was used to construct the sections of movement within the work. Their arrangement and performance varied in response to the processes of tapestry making.
There are 6 movements or gestures in the performance, and each of them is inspired by a particular word from the language of tapestry. These words were chosen because they had dual meanings that could be applied to our own practice. For example, beat in tapestry is the process of hammering down the weft thread once it's been passed between the warp threads. And to do this, they use a special fork which has prongs to push down the threads. And of course, beat also means a pulse, a rhythm, a moment in time. The same with other words like warp. Warp is the downwards threads on the loom and is also the process of distorting something. These words and tapestry technique inspired the qualities of the movement. When devising the movements, we would start with something that resembled that of the process of tapestry making and then expand or warp it to the point where it became less representative of the action and seemed more just as movement. Other movements took inspiration directly from what the word meant. Hacheur is a technique used for blending colours using a triangular stitching pattern. The triangular shape forms the basis of the movement, as well as being echoed within the musical arrangement. The 6 movements are weave, beat, pick, hacheur, loop, and block.
What's brilliant about working with Alex is his understanding, or the understanding that he brought to the piece about tapestry and the craft itself. And what was really original to as a mover to work with was Alex brought certain words that related to tapestry making, but also had dual meanings. And what we did is we looked at those words and looked at how we could embody those words. And how we could reflect them in movement, and from those movements that we created, we accentuated those, we played around with them, and created the movements that you then see on stage in the performance.
The intention was never for these movements to represent tapestry technique in any way, or to indicate the process of making a tapestry. Tapestry was a creative guide to help us in the creation of these movements. And once the 6 movements were in place, we then explored applying the language of tapestry to the arrangement of these movements. What would it be like to warp the movements, to loop the movements, to weave them together? This exploration forms the basis of the first section of the live performance.
Music is one of the two main elements of the live performance, and when woven with movement forms the work. The music was composed by Kinna Whitehead.
Each word, weave, pick and loop relates to a 2-bar phrase which the musicians play according to what the movers choose. I try to relate the words strongly to the music. For example, Hashur is a shaded triangle in Tapestry, so I wrote it for all the musicians to be playing triplets just to embody the triangular shape.
So in the first section of the piece, we, the movers, we are the ones who dictate the movement. So as we shift through the different movements, the musicians have to play the specific rhythm for each move and the specific music. So then it's basically me and the other mover, we are the ones who create the musical pattern and the pattern of movements. And that makes it really nice and always keeps it fresh. And then it also creates a really intricate connection with the musicians, because they have to look at us and play, and we have to just trust that they will follow us, and then it makes it really nice and fresh every single time.
So in the first section, I would say the thing that was most challenging, but also the most interesting, was following the movers, because they essentially comprised a moving score for me, which is a completely new experience, something I've never dealt with before. And what was difficult about that was just having to follow them and keep in time with the musicians at the same time. But it was a really interesting challenge and totally unique experience for me.
So the jig was a quite scary piece of music to look at for the first time, especially when I was asked to then sort of memorize it as well. But it was very important that it was memorized so I could have a more physical connection with the other performers on the stage at the time, rather than just staring at the music. So it was very important to memorize it, and I thought it would be a really difficult challenge to do so, but actually when you look at the music, it's a very simple idea that just gets augmented with something new being added to it, and eventually it sort of transforms, and if you follow that path step by step, it's quite easy to follow. You can feel the sort of rhythm of it transforming in that way. So it's actually not too hard to memorize it, and it feels very, very nice to be doing this sort of music with dance at the same time. It doesn't really happen in music I've played before. It's mostly the music plays some stuff and the dancer does some things, but to have that sort of even though we're doing different things, my music isn't really that related to what Tom is doing in the jig section, but it feels like we have like an understanding or something a little deeper going on.
Alex brought me some images, information and words all about the art of tapestry making, in particular a book titled The Myths of Tapestries. And I took some of these words and created the section titled Story. I chose the ones that particularly resonated with me, and they were to do mostly with ancient Greek myths.
So to me, the story section is all about these fragmented words that Kinna has sprinkled into the text. And I think they're amazing because each word has its own connotation. So when you hear the word dove, for example, that brings up obviously an image of a dove, but there's a lot of things that would go along with that. And so from my perspective as a singer, I'm just trying to bring out those words and those connotations in the text.
So when we were creating the vocabulary of the whole performance, we managed to come up with like an amount of movements. And then for the section of the story, we kind of had to put it all together. So the way we did that is that we play a lot with speed. And there was freedom to not only change the speed, but make it much slower, but also to experiment with the dynamics of the movement and how big or small it becomes as a performer. And then it's really interesting to see that it does affect emotionally the way you tell that story when you change the dynamic of each movement. It felt really good, and it also felt really nice to observe how the dynamics really affected my emotional state and my mood during saying it. And especially because after that it leads to the duet, it kind of finishes the whole piece, and it kind of means that all the aspects of the performance come together and create something beautiful in the end.
As the piece progresses, it moves from something with more structural qualities to a more emotional and narrative-based work. The music drives this emotive change, so at the beginning it starts very much about each individual stitch, each movement, and then it moves more towards the final emotional quality of maybe a tapestry. So we're taking you through the process of making a tapestry with the music.
The tapestry depicts the event in its entirety. The 5 principal colours of the tapestry are presented in the costumes of the performers. The 6 movements, the 3 musical textures, they all blend together within the structure of the performance space, the grid echoing the warp and weft onto which the tapestry is stitched. The tapestry is made up of 14,400 stitches and took over 100 hours to complete. It is a 120 stitch by 120 stitch square, signifying the length and breadth of the performance event.
I didn't really know what I was doing when it came to making the tapestry. The idea of representing the event in tapestry form came first. So when it actually came to the point where I had to sit down and translate the work into something I could stitch into a tapestry, I didn't really know where to start. But I thought about it, and I thought about how I could use shapes and signs to represent things. And this is what I came up with. We have the 6 movements here represented. We have the 3 musical textures. We have the 3 elements of the performance, the live performance, the viewing of the tapestry, and the behind the stitches film. We have the 5 performers, and then the 5 performers come together in the performance area to create the work that you saw. And within this we have the figures woven in, and we have the musical textures woven in, and we also have some of the main themes, the winged man and woman, this kind of pictorial narrative element. And then around the outside we have a visual representation of the structure of the work, moving through the different sections and representing each performer's part within it. Now, I'm not saying this is definitive. This is just what in my mind guided the decision making and helped in the progression of the live performance. And for me it was very much about the process of making a tapestry. You start off unsure of where things should be on the canvas and begin to plot things out. And once you've got one thing in place, it's very easy to see how it relates to another. I know that this section is 3 stitches down, 2 stitches along from the previous section that I just did. With this understanding of where things are, the speed of stitching can increase. The process becomes more repetitive, taking time, effort and accuracy. Then slowly, stitch by stitch, the picture becomes clear. This brings with it excitement, the prospect of success, of creating something of beauty. It then fosters a narrative, a depiction of an event. It becomes no longer a series of stitches, but more than that, a story. And then finally it is finished, and it is seen in its entirety, mounted and displayed. It is the product of all the time and effort that has gone into it. Now, it could be said that the performance is a depiction of all of that process in music and movement. It's like play. We were creating justifications for what we were doing and forming links between the work we were making and this world of tapestry we had immersed ourselves in. And I wouldn't say it was based in fact, but it's what we believed, and it's what we thought about when we were making the work. How could we follow and depict the structural and emotional journey that a weaver might experience?
Every movement that is made in the piece has come in some form from a movement that a tapestry maker has made, and then we've obviously used that and accentuated that and built on it to create the movement that you see in the piece. But I do think the piece talks about something more than just tapestry. I think it talks about like the flow of inspiration into creativity that every artist goes through, whether they're a painter or a filmmaker. And I think it looks at the struggle that an artist goes through as well in order to reach the final product. And I think if you speak to any artist in any medium, they will never be entirely happy with the finished work that they create. They'll never feel that they've ever reached something perfect. But there's certainly an argument to say that what art is the working towards perfection rather than the final finished piece. And I think in that way it reflects humanity, as humanity is always, the human experience is always a work towards something, a work towards happiness, a work towards financial security, a work towards a good relationship, whatever that is. But it's always the struggling for rather than the completion. That's what makes us human, and that's what art represents. So in this piece, I feel that we show that. We show the struggling for rather than the finished piece, which is what you'll see in the tapestry, is you'll see the final product. But what does the artist have to go through in order to complete that? And I think that's what this piece demonstrates really well.
What do I think the performance is about? I think the performance is about the ideas of translating certain elements of an art form into another art form. So in this case, it's obviously about tapestry, and we're translating the act of making a tapestry and the methods that are utilised and the terminology that are very specific to that art form, and trying to translate them into art, dance, and music.
For me as a performer, this project is about all the elements of the performance coming together, just like the stitches of the tapestry create the final product. So we have the music, we have the movers, we have the singer, and they all create something just like the final tapestry is created.
It's about bringing together lots of small parts to create something bigger.
The most important and interesting part of the project for me was witnessing how the movements transformed alongside the music. This was particularly the case with the first section. It was brilliant to see how the two art forms could work so closely together and influence each other.
It's all about the making of the work for me, the people and the shared experience. An investment of energies in a creative goal really brings me a lot of joy. And I think what drives me is that sense of unknowing, of getting a group of people together that don't really know one another and attempting something that you don't really fully understand, and the potential of what that outcome could be.
Bye.